Every night at exactly 2 a.m., the crying started. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell had searched every room of his 32-room mansion and found nothing. But on the seventh night, when he finally discovered the truth hidden behind the East Wing wall, his entire world shattered and would never be the same again. Hello friends, welcome to Stories by Jason. Before we start, please do not forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The mansion never slept. That was the first thing people noticed when they came to work for Ethan Caldwell. The way the building itself seemed to breathe, to hum, to hold its own kind of wakefulness even in the deepest hours of the night. The lights in the East Corridor stayed on until 3. The security system blinked its red eye every 30 seconds. The old radiators knocked and hissed like they were having conversations in a language no one alive could translate. Ethan was used to all of it. He had lived in this mansion for 11 years, ever since he'd bought it from the estate of a shipping magnate whose family no longer wanted the burden of its upkeep. 40 rooms, 4 acres of sculpted grounds, a wine cellar that descended 2 floors below street level. He had never once felt crowded inside its walls. He had, in fact, spent most of those 11 years feeling profoundly, exhaustingly alone. At 44, Ethan Caldwell was what the business press called a titan. Technology infrastructure, the invisible architecture that made the modern world run. His company, Caldwell Systems, operated in 31 countries and employed north of 80,000 people. His net worth, depending on which publication you read and which quarter you were examining, landed somewhere between $9 and $14 billion. He had been photographed with presidents. He had been profiled in every magazine that mattered. He had twice been called the most important man in American business by people whose opinions shaped markets. He ate dinner alone every night at a long oak table designed for 16. The staff knew better than to make this a topic of conversation. Ethan was not a cruel employer. He was, by all measures, a fair one. Generous salaries, comprehensive benefits, clear expectations consistently applied. But he did not invite familiarity. He did not ask about weekends. He did not make small talk in hallways. He moved through the mansion like a man conducting a silent, permanent negotiation with the space around him, always occupying it, never quite inhabiting it. The new maid arrived on a Tuesday in early March. Her name was Rosa Medina. She was 26 years old, with dark, careful eyes and a manner of moving through rooms that suggested she had spent a long time learning how to take up as little space as possible. Her references were impeccable: 3 years with a family in Connecticut, 2 years before that with a diplomatic household in Washington. She spoke quietly, worked quickly, and had a particular gift for anticipating what a room needed before anyone asked. Ethan noticed her the way he noticed most of the staff: briefly, practically, and not at all. She was assigned the West Wing and the main floor common areas. She was not assigned the East Wing. Nobody was assigned the East Wing. It had been closed for 8 years since the last time Ethan had been willing to walk its particular stretch of corridor and face what it contained. For the first 3 weeks nothing was unusual. Rosa arrived at 7. She worked until 3. She left without speaking to anyone more than necessary. Ethan's household manager, Gerald Ashworth, a thin, precise man in his late 50s who had been with Ethan for 9 years, reported that she was excellent, reliable, no issues. Then the crying started. The first night Ethan thought he was dreaming. It came at precisely 2:07 in the morning, a thin, high sound, unmistakably infantile, drifting through the walls of his bedroom on the 3rd floor like something carried on a current of air. He sat up. He listened. After perhaps 4 minutes it stopped. He told himself it was the pipes. He went back to sleep. The second night it came again. 2:09. Same high, desperate quality. Same muffled distance, as though it were coming from somewhere behind the walls rather than in any identifiable room. He got up this time and stood in the hallway in his bare feet, turning his head slowly, trying to triangulate the source. The mansion settled around him. The radiators knocked. The crying faded, and the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. The 3rd night he walked the entire 2nd floor, found nothing. The 4th night he walked the 3rd floor and the main floor and both sets of back stairs, found nothing. The 5th night he stood outside the door to the East Wing, for the first time in 8 years. The door was old oak, paneled, fitted with a heavy brass handle that had tarnished to a dull olive in the years since anyone had used it. There was no lock. Ethan had never needed one. Nobody on his staff would have entered without permission, and Ethan himself had simply not gone back. Not after what that wing represented. Not after what he had lost inside it. He stood there in the dark hallway with his hand on the brass handle and listened. The crying was coming from the other side. His heart was doing something unfamiliar, a kind of hammering that had nothing to do with fear of intruders and everything to do with the particular vulnerability of a man confronting the place where his grief lived. He pushed the door open anyway, because whatever else Ethan Caldwell was, he was not a coward. The east wing smelled of dust and old wood and something else, something warm and new and entirely out of place. He moved down the corridor with his phone's flashlight cutting a white wedge through the dark, past the sitting room, past the old library alcove, past the room that used to be, that he didn't look at directly, around the corner to the small suite at the far end that had once been used for overnight guests. The door was cracked open. Light leaked through the gap, not from a lamp, but from the blue-white glow of a phone screen. Ethan pushed the door open. Rosa Medina was sitting on the floor between the old armchair and the window, her knees drawn to her chest, her back against the wall, and in her arms, wrapped in what looked like a uniform jacket and a pale yellow blanket, was a baby, newborn or close to it. Its face was the color of dawn, and its tiny hands were clenched at its cheeks, and it was making the sound that had been pulling Ethan out of sleep for 5 nights running. Rosa looked up at him. Her face went through 4 expressions in the space of 2 seconds: shock, terror, calculation, and then something that landed finally on a desperate, exhausted resignation. "I am sorry," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am so sorry. I had nowhere else to go." Ethan stood in the doorway of the room he hadn't entered in 8 years, looking at a woman he'd hired 3 weeks ago and the baby she was holding in the dark, and felt something shift in his chest, something that had been calcified for a long time beginning, slowly and painfully, to move. "How long?" he said. 4 days. She pulled the baby closer. "I gave birth 4 days ago, at the hospital. Then I came back because I have no one. I have no one, Mr. Caldwell, and I didn't know what else to do." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the baby. The baby had stopped crying. It was looking up at nothing with the ancient, unfocused gaze of the newborn, that expression that always looked, to Ethan, like someone trying to remember where they had just come from. "What's the baby's name?" he said. Rosa's chin trembled. "I haven't named him yet," she said. "I was afraid to name him before I knew if we were going to be all right." Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and called Gerald. It was 2:17 in the morning. Gerald answered on the second ring, because Gerald always answered on the second ring. "Get the guest suite on the second floor ready," Ethan said, "and call Dr. Harmon. Tell her I need a house call first thing in the morning." He paused. "And Gerald, bring some food down to the east wing. Whatever we have, soup if there's any." He ended the call and looked back at Rosa. "You're not in trouble," he said. "Not tonight." The word secret does something specific to a household. It changes the air. It makes people careful in ways they weren't careful before, redistributes attention, creates small pockets of hyper-awareness in corridors and doorways. By the morning after Ethan found Rosa and the baby, everyone on the staff knew that something had happened in the East Wing, and nobody knew exactly what. And the mansion hummed with a particular frequency of collective, disciplined curiosity. Gerald, to his credit, ran the household with precisely the same tight professionalism he always did. Dr. Harmon came at 8 and declared both Rosa and the baby in reasonable health, given the circumstances, the baby slightly underweight, Rosa exhausted and borderline malnourished, both in need of warmth and rest and consistent food. She left a set of instructions and a list of supplies, and gave Ethan a look over her reading glasses that communicated, without words, that she had a great many questions she was choosing not to ask. Ethan had questions too. He simply approached them the way he approached everything, methodically, without panic, building toward understanding one confirmed fact at a time. He gave Rosa 3 days before he asked anything. During those 3 days he stayed away from the second-floor guest suite, except to have Gerald relay whatever she needed. He worked. He took calls. He reviewed quarterly reports and participated in a video conference with his Singapore office, and signed off on an acquisition that had been pending for 2 months. He did all of this with the same focused efficiency that had always defined him. But at night, alone in his study with a glass of scotch he rarely finished, he found himself listening. Not for crying. Rosa had settled the baby into a proper rhythm now, and the nights were quiet. He was listening for something else. Something he hadn't been able to name since the moment he'd pushed open that door, and found a woman sitting on the floor of his east wing with a newborn in her arms and the specific expression of someone who had run out of places to run. He recognized that expression. He had worn it himself once. He knew what it looked like from the inside. On the fourth day, he knocked on the guest suite door. Rosa answered it looking better, still fragile, still with the particular translucency of someone who had been through something enormous and hadn't fully come back yet, but her eyes were clearer. The baby was asleep in the portable crib that Gerald had sourced with his characteristic efficiency. The room smelled of formula and clean linen. "Can I come in?" Ethan asked. She stepped back to let him. He sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was the specific kind that forms between two people who both have things they're not sure how to begin saying. "You should know," Rosa said finally, "that I will leave whenever you want me to. I understand that what I did was—" "I'm not asking you to leave," Ethan said. "I want to understand what happened, all of it, from the beginning." Rosa looked at her hands. Then she looked at the sleeping baby. Then she looked at Ethan, and he could see her making the calculation. The same calculation people made when they were deciding whether the truth was likely to cost them more than the lie. "My mother worked in a house like this," she said. "A long time ago, before I was born." Ethan waited. "She worked for a family, a very wealthy family. She was young, 19, and she was good at her work, and the man of the house—" Rosa paused. "The man of the house took advantage of that, of her, of the fact that she was young and alone and had no power and nowhere to go." She said it plainly, without drama, the way people say things they've had to say before and have learned to say without breaking apart. "She became pregnant," Rosa continued. "And the man, when he found out, had his lawyers threaten her, had his household manager tell her that if she said a word to anyone they would destroy her, deport her, make sure she never worked again. She was undocumented at the time. She was terrified, so she left. And she raised her child alone, and she never told the man. And she spent the rest of her life making sure her daughter understood two things." She paused. "How to work hard. And how to survive." The room was very quiet. "Your mother," Ethan said. "Yes." "And the man she worked for." He said it carefully, the way you say something when you already feel the shape of what's coming and are not yet ready for it. "What was his name?" Rosa looked at him steadily. "His name was Richard Caldwell," she said. "Your father." Ethan didn't move for a very long time. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it sent out were immediate and cold and moved through everything. Richard Caldwell. His father, who had died 6 years ago at 71, beloved by the business community, eulogized in 3 newspapers, remembered as a self-made man of extraordinary character. Richard Caldwell, whose portrait hung in the lobby of the company headquarters. Richard Caldwell, who had been, by any observable measure, a good man. "You came here on purpose," Ethan said. "It wasn't an accusation, it was just an understanding arriving." "I came here because I needed work and because I had nowhere else to go," Rosa said. "Both of those things are true at once. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. I didn't plan," her voice caught, "I didn't plan for my situation to be what it is. The father of my baby left when he found out I was pregnant. I had savings for 6 more weeks. I needed the job. And yes, I wanted to see. I wanted to see what kind of man you were, whether you were like him. And I don't know yet," she said quietly. "But you brought me soup at 2 in the morning, that's something." Ethan stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the grounds, the bare March trees, the gray sky, the perfectly maintained paths that wound through 4 acres of carefully controlled nature. He thought about his father. He thought about what he knew of his father and what he apparently had never known. He thought about a 19-year-old girl with no power and no protection, and a man with every advantage deciding that none of that was his problem. "You said your mother raised her child alone," he said, without turning around. "That child, that was you." "Yes." He turned around then. Then Richard Caldwell was your father. Rosa looked at him with those careful dark eyes. Yes, she said, which means you and I are half-siblings, Ethan said. The word dropped into the room like something both terrible and clarifying. He sat back down in the chair. He put his face in his hands, not crying, not yet, just pressing the palms against his eyes as though he could hold the information there, contain it, keep it from spreading until he was ready to deal with what it meant. Does anyone else know? He asked. Gerald Ashworth, Rosa said. Ethan's head came up. What? He knew my mother. He worked for your father before he worked for you. When I applied for the position here, he recognized my last name. He called me before the interview. He told me to use a different name on the application. He told me not to come. Her voice was steady, but her hands, Ethan noticed, were clenched in her lap. He said if I came anywhere near this house, he would make sure I regretted it. Gerald, 9 years. The man who answered on the second ring. The man Ethan trusted with the running of every personal detail of his life. The specific weight of betrayal is different from other kinds of pain. It has a texture, something granular and cold, like walking on sand in the dark and not being sure of the ground beneath you. Ethan had felt it before in business. He had never felt it inside his own home. I came anyway, Rosa said, because I was out of options, and because, she looked at the sleeping baby, because I needed someone to know that we existed, that we mattered, that we weren't just a secret someone got to bury. The shocking thing about the truth, Ethan had always believed, was not that it emerged. Everything emerged eventually. The pressure of reality was simply too great for lies to hold indefinitely. No, the shocking thing was always the timing. The truth never arrived when you were prepared for it. It arrived when you were already standing at the edge of something, when the ground was already uncertain, when one more revelation was the thing most likely to send you over. He spent that evening in his study, surrounded by documents. Not business documents, personal ones. His father's personal files, which he had been the executor of, which he had spent exactly 3 weeks sorting through after Richard's death 6 years ago, and had then sealed in archival boxes in the third-floor storage room because going through a dead man's private papers was a form of intimacy that Ethan had found, unexpectedly, unbearable. He told himself he would come back to them. He never had. He came back to them now. Gerald had called in sick for the first time in 9 years. Ethan noted this without comment and sent a text acknowledging it. Then he went upstairs and pulled the boxes down himself. His father had been meticulous. Every document filed, every letter labeled, every receipt and record cataloged in a system that reflected the same precise, controlled intelligence Ethan had inherited from him, or believed he had inherited from him. 4 boxes of personal correspondence. 2 boxes of financial records going back 40 years. 1 smaller box, sealed with a strip of packing tape that had aged to a deep amber, labeled in his father's handwriting, private. Do not open until you're ready. He had assumed, when he first found that box, that it contained something about his father's medical history, or perhaps some emotional reckoning with the life he'd lived. The kind of document men of a certain generation sometimes left behind, equal parts confession and justification. He had put it aside to open when he felt equal to whatever it contained. He opened it now. Inside, a letter, a photograph, and a sealed envelope from a legal firm he didn't recognize, dated 8 months before his father's death. He read the letter first. His father's handwriting was familiar, the same tight, controlled script that had filled birthday cards and margin notes on business documents throughout Ethan's childhood. But the voice in the letter was not the voice Ethan associated with those cards and notes. This voice was older, quieter, stripped of the certainty that had always characterized Richard Caldwell's communication. Ethan, it began. If you're reading this, then I didn't find a way to tell you while I was living, which means I was a coward to the end about this particular thing, and I am sorry for it. He read for 20 minutes without stopping. The letter confirmed everything Rosa had told him, and added layers she hadn't known. His father had not simply dismissed Rosa's mother and moved on. He had, in the years after, particularly in the last decade of his life, been consumed by what he had done. He had tried, through intermediaries, to find Maria Medina. He had been told she had died in 2019. Ethan's chest constricted at this. Of an illness she had not been able to treat adequately, because she had spent her savings on her daughter's education. His father had established, quietly, a trust. A trust administered by the legal firm whose envelope sat unopened on the table in front of Ethan. A trust meant for Maria's child, his child, if she could ever be found. He had never stopped looking. He had never found her in time to tell her himself. I know this doesn't fix it, his father had written near the end. I know there is nothing that fixes what I did to that girl, what I took from her, what I allowed fear and selfishness and the ugly arithmetic of power to make me capable of. I want you to know that the man you saw was real, the man who loved you, who was proud of you, who tried to be good in the ways he knew how to be. But he was real alongside the man who failed Maria Medina. Both of those men were me. I am asking you to hold both of them, not because I deserve it, but because the truth deserves it. Ethan sat with the letter for a long time. Then he opened the photograph. It was old physical photograph, color faded to a warm amber. Two young women in what looked like the kitchen of a house, laughing at something off camera. One of them he didn't recognize. She had dark eyes and a specific luminous quality that reminded him, with a jolt that moved through his sternum, of Rosa. The other one was his mother. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting he didn't recognize, Maria and Caroline, March 1998. His mother's name was Caroline. He sat there in the still study with the photograph in his hands and felt the full architecture of it settle into place. His mother and Maria Medina had known each other, had, apparently, been close enough to be photographed laughing together in a kitchen. And then something had happened. His father had happened, and the friendship had collapsed along with everything else. And two women who had once laughed together in a kitchen had spent the next 25 years on opposite sides of an enormous, terrible secret. He opened the legal envelope last. The trust was real, substantial, 8 figures. His father had funded it consistently over 15 years, drawing from personal accounts in a way that Ethan, who had never closely examined his father's personal finances as distinct from the business ones, had never noticed. The firm had instructions. Upon Richard's death, make every effort to locate Maria Medina or her descendants. Report results to Ethan annually. The most recent annual report, dated 3 months ago, had been delivered to this address and received by the household manager. Gerald Ashworth had signed for it. Gerald, who had called Rosa before her interview. Gerald, who had threatened her. Gerald, who had been managing this secret for years, protecting what? His own position. His loyalty to a version of Richard Caldwell that this letter rendered obsolete. Or something more calculated, something involving the trust, the money, the documented silence. Ethan closed the legal envelope. He picked up his phone. He called Rosa. "Come to my study," he said. "Bring the baby if you need to. I need you to see something." She came 20 minutes later in soft clothes and bare feet, the baby wrapped against her chest in the yellow blanket. She stood in the doorway of his study and looked at the papers spread across the desk, and then at Ethan's face, and something in his expression made her cross the room without being asked and sit down across from him. He pushed the photograph across the desk. Rosa looked at it for a long time without speaking. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "That's my mother," she said. "I know," Ethan said. "The other one is mine." She looked down at the photograph again. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. "They knew each other," Rosa said. "They did," Ethan said. "And I think," his voice had developed a quality he didn't entirely recognize, "I think they would both have wanted us to know each other too, if things had gone differently." Rosa looked at him. The baby stirred against her chest and made a small sound. "He left you something," Ethan said. "My father left you something substantial. Your mother too, but he stopped." "She died," Rosa said softly, "in 2019. "I know, I'm sorry." The word sorry hung in the air between them, insufficient and necessary at once, the way it always is when it's being offered for a debt too large for language to fully settle. "What was in the letter?" Rosa asked. "What did he say?" Ethan slid it across the desk. He watched her read it. He watched her face move through things: grief, anger, the particular exhaustion of someone who has waited a long time to be seen and finally finds that being seen feels both like relief and like being reopened. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully along its original creases and set it down on the desk and looked at the baby against her chest. "I want to name him," she said quietly. "I think I'm ready now." "What are you going to call him?" Ethan asked. She looked up at him. "Can I ask you something first?" "Yes." "Your mother," she said, "was she good to you?" "She was extraordinary," Ethan said. Rosa nodded slowly. "My mother's name was Maria," she said. "I think I want to call him Marco, after her, close enough to carry her, but his own name." "Marco," Ethan said. He let the name sit in the room. "That's a good name." The confrontation with Gerald happened on a Thursday morning, in the same study where Ethan had sat with Rosa, and the photograph, and the weight of everything his father had kept from him. Ethan had spent 2 days preparing for it, not emotionally preparing, which was a different and longer process, but practically preparing, pulling financial records, cross-referencing the annual reports from the legal firm, documenting every piece of evidence that Gerald had received, signed for, and acted on without Ethan's knowledge. The picture that emerged was not a simple one. Gerald had not stolen from the trust. The money was intact, confirmed by Ethan's own attorney, who had spent 48 hours reviewing the firm's accounts with an urgency that reflected how seriously she was taking what Ethan had laid in front of her. Gerald had not benefited financially from his silence. What he had done was something more complex and, in some ways, more troubling. He had made a unilateral decision to protect a version of Ethan's life that he believed Ethan needed, or perhaps that Gerald himself needed, having built his identity around his role in this household, around his loyalty to the Caldwell name. He had decided that the truth was too disruptive, that Ethan was better off not knowing, that Rosa was a complication to be discouraged, not a human being with a legitimate claim on the family she had never been allowed to belong to. Gerald arrived at the mansion at his usual time, 7:45, and found Ethan waiting for him in the study. He took in the documents on the desk and Ethan's expression, and did what Ethan had always respected about him. He didn't pretend. "You found everything," Gerald said. "I found everything," Ethan confirmed. Gerald sat down without being asked. He was 61 years old, and in that moment he looked it in a way he usually didn't. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I know you did," Ethan kept his voice level. "I also know that you called Rosa before her interview and threatened her. A young woman, alone, pregnant, with no resources. You threatened her." Gerald looked at his hands. "I didn't know she was pregnant." "Does that change it?" A long pause. "No," Gerald said quietly, "it doesn't. She spent a week sleeping on the floor of my East Wing with a newborn baby because she had no options," Ethan said. "Because you told her this door was closed, and the door was never yours to close." The room was very still. "I need you to resign," Ethan said. "I'm not going to pursue legal action for what you did. I've thought about it carefully and I don't believe it would serve anyone. But I need you to leave this household. Today." Gerald nodded once. He rose from the chair with the careful movements of a man carrying something heavy. He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Your father was a complicated man," he said without turning around. "I worked for him for 22 years. I watched him do things I admired and things I couldn't forgive. The way I handled this, the reason I handled it the way I did," he stopped. "I suppose I thought that protecting the image of who he was meant protecting it from all the parts that didn't fit. I was wrong." "Yes," Ethan said, "you were." Gerald left. Ethan sat for a while in the quiet that followed, and then went upstairs to the room where Rosa was feeding Marco his morning bottle in a chair by the window, the thin March sunlight coming in, and touching both of them with the particular gentleness of early spring. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. "It's done," she said. "It's done." Marco made a small, contented sound against the bottle, and Rosa looked down at him with that expression that Ethan had been watching and trying to name. Something between wonder and gravity, the look of someone discovering in real time what it means to be responsible for another person's entire world. "I want to talk about what comes next," Ethan said, "if you're willing." Rosa raised her eyes. "Trust is yours," he said. "It was set up for you, for your mother, and for you. My attorneys are already processing the transfer. That's not something I'm offering, it's something that's already yours." He paused. "But I'd also like, if you're open to it, to talk about what family might look like for us, for all three of us. I know that's an enormous word for people who have known each other for less than a month. I know it requires a kind of trust that doesn't arrive instantly, but I'd like to try. If you would. Rosa looked at him for a long time. The sunlight moved on the floor between them. I grew up without a family, she said, except for my mother, and she worked her whole life just so I'd have a chance. She never complained about it. She never let me see how much it cost her. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were full. I want Marco to have more than that. Not more money, more people. More people who see him and claim him. Then let's give him that, Ethan said. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing about the recalibration of a life is simple. It happens in increments, in small and ordinary moments that accumulate slowly towards something that eventually resembles the shape of a new world. Ethan hired a new household manager, a woman named Patricia who had 2 daughters and a genuine talent for making large spaces feel lived in. He had the East Wing opened and cleaned and repainted, not erasing its history but integrating it, letting it breathe again. He had a proper nursery set up across the hall from his study, close enough that he could hear Marco if he needed something in the night. He started eating dinner at the long oak table for 2. Sometimes 3, when Marco was awake and in his bouncer, and doing the thing he had recently discovered he could do, which was tracking Ethan's face across a room with the focused, serious attention of someone conducting a thorough assessment. Ethan found, to his own considerable surprise, that he didn't mind being assessed. He called his attorney and had his father's trust distributed properly and completely, with a letter of explanation to the legal firm that closed the chapter with the precision Ethan applied to everything. He had a conversation with the firm's senior partner, a woman who had been managing the trust for 15 years, and who told him, with measured professional composure, that she was relieved it had finally found its way home. He thought about his father, the man who had written I was a coward to the end about this particular thing, and tried to do the thing his father had asked, hold both versions at once. The man who had failed Maria Medina. The man who had spent 20 years trying, inadequately, to make it right. The father who had raised Ethan with genuine love and passed on genuine values and also left him a box labeled "Do Not Open until you're ready" because he couldn't bring himself to say the words out loud. He held both. It was hard, he did it anyway. Rosa, for her part, was becoming. That was the word Ethan found for what he was watching. She was a young woman who had spent her whole life in survival mode, learning to take up less space, learning to need less, learning to carry everything herself because there was no one to share the weight with. And now there was someone. And the process of learning to put things down when you'd been holding them alone for a long time was not graceful or quick. It was full of small moments of recalibration, of testing whether the ground would hold, of reaching for help, and then pulling back and then reaching again. Ethan was patient with this. He was patient in ways he hadn't known he was capable of. Marco, who was not patient with anyone about anything, and made his needs known with democratic enthusiasm, regardless of the hour, was an extraordinary teacher in this regard. By June, 4 months after the night Ethan had pushed open the door to the East Wing and found a woman sitting on the floor with a baby in her arms, the mansion felt different. Not softer, exactly. Not domesticated in the way that suggested its edges had been filed down. Different in the way that a space feels when it is finally being used for what it was meant for, when the rooms are full, and the table is set, and the hallways carry the sounds of someone living in them rather than just occupying them. One evening, sitting in the garden as the late summer light came down through the trees, and Marco slept in his pram between them, Rosa said something that Ethan turned over in his mind for a long time afterward. My mother used to say that secrets are just truths that haven't found the right moment yet, she said. I used to think she meant it as comfort, like everything works out eventually, but I think she meant something harder than that. I think she meant that the truth is always there, whether we're ready for it or not, and we can spend our lives running from it or we can stop and let it catch us. Ethan thought about a baby crying in the dark, about a door he hadn't opened in 8 years, about a man who left a box labeled "Until you're ready" because he understood, at least, that readiness was something you arrived at, not something you could force. She was wise, he said. She was, Rosa said. I miss her every day. The garden was quiet around them. Marco slept on, peaceful and entirely unconcerned with the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him into this particular life, In this particular garden, between these two particular people, half-siblings who had found each other at the bottom of a secret, on the other side of a cry in the dark. It was not the family anyone had planned. It was not the family any of them had known how to hope for. It was the family that the truth, finally arriving in its own time and at its own cost, had made possible. And in the morning it would still be there. Can you imagine it? Sleeping on a cold floor in a wing of a mansion that a billionaire had sealed off for 8 years, holding a 4-day-old baby in a borrowed jacket, not knowing if the next knock on that door would end you. That was Rosa's reality. That was the corner that fear, betrayal, and one man's cowardice had pushed her into. And here's what gets me every single time I think about this story. Gerald had all the information. He knew about the trust. He knew about the letter. He knew this woman had a rightful claim on a family she'd never been allowed to know. And he made a choice, in his own comfort, to keep her locked out in the cold. How many people in your life have made that choice about your truth? How many times have you been the Rosa in someone else's story, dismissed, minimized, told the door wasn't for you? This story isn't just about a billionaire and a secret. It's about what happens when one person finally decides to stop letting fear run the house. Ethan pushed that door open. He put his face in his hands and he felt the weight of it, and then he got back up and did the work. That's what justice actually looks like, not a courtroom, not a verdict, just a human being choosing truth over comfort, over and over, until it becomes the new foundation. If this story made you feel something, if it gave you that tightness in your chest that comes when you recognize something true, then we need you here. This community is built for people who believe that truth matters, that hidden people deserve to be found, that the Rosas of the world deserve more than a locked door and a threat. Smash that like button if you believe every secret deserves to find its moment. Drop Marco in the comments if you felt that moment when Rosa finally named her baby, because that moment was everything. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. We have more coming that will shake you, move you, and remind you why you believe in people. You are not alone in caring about this. You are not alone in wanting justice to find the people it missed. This is your community. Stay in it.